All right, this is the beginning of our lecture, part one of our lecture on primate behavior, social organization, and reproductive strategies. This will correlate with the chapter 6 in our explorations free textbook. All right, so this is one of my most favorite chapters. I love this chapter because there's so many fascinating little bits of information about our evolutionary past, about our closest living relatives. This is one of my favorite topics to learn about. All right, so let's talk a little bit about primate society. So essentially, how do primates organize themselves? How is that influenced by natural selection? How is that influenced by our evolutionary past? And essentially, why do we care? Why is this important to us? Why are primate societies important to us in a class on humans? It is believed that primate societies and social organizations and dominance hierarchies, all that good stuff, that they have evolved and have been influenced through the processes of natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, mutation, all that stuff that we learned about in chapter 4. But definitely maintained through natural selection, that essentially it became beneficial. It became beneficial for our species and for our order to be social. Primate societies are highly organized. We know that primate individuals form long-term relationships. They form alliances with one another. They sometimes engage in conflict with one another. Sometimes it's resolved, sometimes it's not. But essentially, social behavior in primates is thought to enhance survival and reproduction and is thought to be maintained through natural selection. So that's one of those major forces of evolution we learned about way back in topic chapter 4. So why is that? Any ideas? Why do you think in evolutionary terms, why would it be advantageous to live in a social group and to depend upon other members of our group instead of being more individualistic? Why would it be beneficial to work together? Any ideas?
The same reason that like it takes a village, like what we say with women raising children.
Absolutely. Excellent, Hank. The whole idea it takes a village to raise a child. One of the common characteristics of the primate order is our infants are born extremely dependent upon us for survival. So if we live in a social group, then we're not alone in that endeavor. We have not only our spouse or our partner, but we also have other members of our social group, grandmothers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and even unrelated members of the group that are just, the friends that we consider family. Looking even deeper in our evolutionary past, the whole safety of numbers may have been another reason why we evolved to live in larger social groups because even though apes today are relatively large animals, in the past we were very small. We were about the size of a modern day raccoon, or possibly even smaller. So for very small bodied primates, and we're trying to avoid predators, the whole safety in numbers is another reason why we might have evolved to live in larger social groups. And we'll learn more about that later on in this lecture when we learn about vocalizations. All right. Okay, residence patterns. So primate residence patterns essentially refers to how is that primate society organized? How many adult males, how many adult females, and essentially what's their reproductive strategy too, because these two things are generally correlated and related to one another. And primates have a really wide variety of ways that they do this. There's actually 6 different residence patterns we're going to learn about today. So essentially a residence pattern, think of it as the home group or the natal group. It's divided according to the number of adult males and females present in that group, and it's also related to their reproductive strategies. So the reproductive strategies we will talk about, there's only 3 reproductive strategies, but there will be 6 different residence patterns. So polygynous, and be careful, these are very similar words. So polygynous refers to one male, many females. So that's one dominant male that's mating with all of the females in his group. So we're going to see this in Hamadryas baboons, gelada baboons, gorillas. Some of the other old world monkeys will have this strategy, but essentially it's one male mating with all of the females in his natal group, or in his home group, I should say. That's a better way to look at it. And then polyandrous is the opposite. Polyandrous is one dominant female mating with all of the males in her home group. as the reproductively receptive ones. So polyandrous, one female, many males. We see that in a lot of the New World monkeys and some of the Strepsirrhines. And then finally monogamous, which is obviously one male and one female. That last one there, at least if you're looking at the primate order as a whole, is probably the rarest one. Because you really only see that obviously in some human societies and then in the gibbons and the siamangs, and there's a few Strepsirrhines that do this occasionally. But in the primate order, generally, if we're looking at non-human primates, when we say monogamy, we mean serial monogamy. So it's just like it sounds, a series of monogamous relationships over the course of their reproductive years. Solitude, so the primates living in solitude is very rare. So let's just look here at this one. This is a good slide to understand this. So solitary primates are very rare. We only really see this in orangutans. So it's the female will live with her dependent offspring, but the male will generally live on his own unless he is on kind of a honeymoon with one of his females. So the male will mate with all of the females within his range. So I think I mentioned a little bit before when we were talking about why orangutans are endangered. This is one of the reasons, because they live in solitude and they depend upon the forest canopy to give them safe passage from one mating partner to the next. So when that male is trying to get to his mating partners, if he doesn't have a safe passageway with the canopy, then he may die trying to reproduce. So it's really only orangutans that we see practice this particular mating strategy. The most common strategy for the primates is probably various forms of polygamy. So number one would be a one male multi-female group. We call this a harem group. So that blue primate is representing the male, the red is representing the females. So we see the one male multi-female groupings in Hamadryas baboons and gelada baboons and gorillas and some of the other old world monkey societies. So that's a one male multi-female group, also called a harem. And then type number two is just the opposite. It's one female, multi-male. So it's that one dominant female with multiple males in her group. We see that polyandrous mating structure in a lot of the New World monkeys, the platyrrhines. Type number three, which is also another common strategy among the primate order, which is just multi-male, multi-female. So we see this in chimpanzees and bonobos, a lot of New World monkeys, and a lot of Old World monkeys. So in the multi-male, multi-female strategies, especially in chimpanzees, we'll see pretty complex dominance hierarchies, where the dominant male or the few dominant males generally have increased access to resources and also increased access to mating partners. Type number four, the all-male group, also called the bachelors. So type number four is going to exist right alongside type number one. So essentially, the all males, the bachelors, their goal is to try to gain access and try to overthrow the harem master in group type number one. So their goal, all of these bachelors down here, their goal is to eventually be part of to be the big man, to be the main man in that harem group. Okay, so we're going to watch a video clip about this here in just a second. But for now, know that the all males, the bachelors, type number four, are going to exist along the outskirts of these one male multi-female groupings. Type number five. So type number 5 and 6 are probably the rarest if I had to rank them. Type number 5 and 6 are the rarest if we're looking at the primate order as a whole. So type 5 is the one male, one female, the monogamous pairing. So we see that in gibbons, siamangs, of course, some humans, and there's a few Strepsirrhines that you'll see it in. And then finally, type number 6 would be the rarest of all, the solitary or the solitude, which we really only see in one species. That's the orangutans. So the orangutan females will live with their dependent offspring, but the males generally live in solitude unless they are on a honeymoon with one of their females. And they do actually call it a honeymoon. They call it going off for a honeymoon with one of their females sometimes. All right, questions so far? Nothing? Okay. All right, let's talk about dispersal. So you've heard me use the term natal group or home group. So just think of natal group as the group that primate was born into. So in most primate societies, in the vast majority of them, either the males or the females will disperse or leave their natal group at time of sexual maturity. And the reason for that is it's a reproductive strategy to avoid incest. So if all the females leave the natal group and go to another one, that means it's very unlikely that they will breed with a brother or a cousin, right? And then same thing, if it's a male dispersal, if all the males, all the bachelors leave the natal group at time of sexual maturity, then it's very unlikely that they'll end up breeding with a sister, an aunt, or a cousin, right? I know it sounds kind of strange, but it's, that's one of those, mating strategies, or one of those dispersal strategies that likely existed, at least in evolutionary terms, likely existed to make sure the gene pool stays deep, make sure that the gene pool remains diverse, and that there are very few cases of primates breeding with someone that's too closely related to them. Okay. So group dispersal also reduces competition amongst males, because particularly in those societies, it can be very male dominated, very patriarchal. The males can come into direct competition with one another so much sometimes where it's very detrimental to the entire group. So when male competition is too intense, sometimes that's a primate society that will practice male dispersal. All right, so I think I might have told you this before, but in general, overall body size, dimorphism, sexual dimorphism is also related to primate competition levels. In general, primate societies that have a high level of sexual dimorphism, like gorillas, for example, with males being double the size of females, we see when there's high levels of sexual dimorphism, there's also generally high levels of competition. So generally high SD, when the males are drastically larger than the females, you can take a pretty good guess that's likely a society that practices polygamy, one dominant male mating with all of the females in the group. So this will affect not only body size, but also canine size. So we call those sexually dimorphic canines. We'll see an example of that here in just a moment, sexually dimorphic canines. And then in general, males will compete for access to females, and females will compete for access to resources. When I say resources, I mean food, shelter, territory, protection, all of the above. Because remember, females are not only supporting their own caloric needs and demands, they're oftentimes also supporting possibly a baby developing in utero, or possibly a baby that's still practicing on-demand breastfeeding. And remember, with naturally occurring primates, they're oftentimes practicing on-demand breastfeeding for several years, not several months like we do as modern humans. Okay, so it's just simply because of their nutritional needs that they have to compete more heavily for resources. Okay, and that doesn't mean that occasionally males don't compete for resources and females compete for mates. That's of course what you see here on the slide is a generalization. In general, when you're looking at their reasons, their evolutionary purpose for competition, males are competing for females, females are competing for resources. Okay, all right, so I'm going to have you guys watch a little. Before I do that, actually, let's talk about dominance hierarchies first. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so dominance hierarchies. So dominance hierarchies, when students first hear this term, they think, oh, that's, primates having aggressive interactions with one another, fighting with each other, getting into conflict. And yeah, sometimes that does happen. But sometimes the dominance hierarchies actually exist to reduce the amount of actual violence within the group. Okay, so these are hierarchies that are well maintained and established. Not that there can be fluidity between the rankings, meaning that the dominant male will not always be the dominant male. Obviously, there are those that are underneath him that are vying after that position. So it's not necessarily a static condition. Low-ranking individuals do not typically attack or threaten high-ranking individuals within the group. The low-ranking individuals have the advantage of the protection from the high-ranking. So, even though that they are low-ranking primate, they are still likely going to be protected by those high-ranking primates from any sort of external threat. Okay, high-ranking individuals often display their dominance through various gestures and visual or vocal displays. So when we watch the video clip on the gelada baboons, I want you to keep an eye out for that. I'm not going to tell you exactly what they are yet because I want you to look out for them. And in primate societies, rankings can be somewhat fluid and may change. So it just depends. The dominant male may hold his reign for years or even a decade or longer, or it may be just a few months before someone else takes over. It just really depends upon the species that you're looking at, and also the group that you're looking at. It can vary from troop to troop, from group to group. All right. Questions so far? We feeling good? Okay. All right. So the benefit, essentially, what is the benefit of being a high-ranking primate within your group? So the high-ranking individuals are generally afforded increased access to resources and therefore will have higher reproductive success. If you have more access to mates, if you have more access to food, more access to territory, more access to protection, it's more likely that you're going to survive and reproduce yourself. Okay. So it's just back to simple natural selection. So this may sound very familiar to what we learned way back in chapter 2, 3, and 4, that anything that influences an individual's success will likely also impact their reproductive success. Those that are more likely to survive are also those that are more likely to reproduce and pass their characteristics along to future generations. Particularly in chimpanzee society, high-ranking females tend to have more surviving offspring. Due to many of the reasons above, the high-ranking females have more protection from the high-ranking males, and they also have access to more resources, more food. Daughters of high-ranking females mature faster, again, increased access to protection and food. Decreased birth intervals, remember that's just the period of time between birth A and birth B, birth C, and so on and so forth. So in general, they tend to have more offspring throughout their reproductive lifespan than, say, a low-ranking female would. And the mother's ranking will usually determine at least the initial ranking of her offspring. So especially sons, high-ranking mothers tend to have high-ranking sons, especially in chimpanzee society. All right, infanticide. Infanticide just simply means the killing or the murder of a juvenile. I should say killing, murder. I don't want to anthropomorphize primates here, non-human primates. It's not something that's insanely common, but it does happen. And interestingly enough, it's actually more common in humans than it is in other primates. But it has been observed in the wild amongst red colobus monkeys, savanna baboons, orangutans, gorillas, and chimpanzees. And of course, many primatologists have hypothesized why in the world would this happen. It seems very anti-evolution, very anti survival of the group. If we are a social species, if we care more about the survival of our group than the survival of ourselves, and why in the world would infanticide be something that happens? One primatologist, I believe by the name of Hardy, I'll have to look up I'll have to make sure I'm not misquoting myself, but I believe she came up with a theory that when one of those males takes over the harem groups, if one bachelor, a juvenile male or an almost adult male, takes over one of those harem groups, he may engage in infanticide to ensure that those females in that group enter into their estrous cycle as soon as possible. Because when those females are practicing on-demand breastfeeding, and they have offspring that are on-demand breastfeeding, they're not back in their estrous cycle. They're essentially not fertile. They are not able to then get pregnant with new offspring. So it's a strategy to increase the reproductive fitness of that incoming male, because that incoming male that now has control of the harem, he doesn't know for how long he'll have control. It may be months, it may be a year, it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years. But if it's only going to be months, his goal, if his goal is to increase his personal reproductive success, then not to be crass, but his goal is to impregnate as many of those females as he can, right? He wants to make sure that he can increase his reproductive success while he is the harem master. Okay, so that's one of the theories which has been highly scrutinized and criticized. I bring it up just because it's interesting, but just know that that's not necessarily the answer. We don't know for certain that that's why it happens, but it's one of the hypotheses that's out there as to why infanticide would happen when it seems so anti-evolution and so primates preferring to live in social groups. And then just like that, there is also a theory that concealed ovulation amongst females may have evolved as a reproductive strategy to prevent infanticide. So essentially concealed ovulation just means that the other primates don't know when she's in estrus or when she's ovulating. So they don't know when she might be receptive to becoming pregnant. So if the ovulation is concealed, it will confuse paternity. And, you know, if every male thinks that those offspring might be his, then he's less likely to engage in infanticide. Okay, so again, that's another very scrutinized and criticized theory as well. But it's one of those that's out there. I should say hypothesis, not theory, but it's just one that's out there, and I bring it up because it's interesting to ponder. Okay. I will have you guys ponder it in your groups a little bit later on, but I do want to show you guys a film clip first. Okay. So we're going to watch Gelada harems. So within this little film clip, let me pull it up here for you. And I believe we may have watched it with locomotion, but I want you to watch it again because I want you to focus on something different this time. It's just a short little clip. It's about 4 or 5 minutes. But this time I want you to focus on, oh no, it's called Defending a Monkey Hair. There it is. No, it's not the harem. Oh, and I brought it up anyways. Okay, so what I want you to focus on while you're watching this is a few things. So let me write these questions in the chat. I want you to focus on what residence patterns do you notice here? There will be 2. Okay, so what residence patterns do you notice? There will be 2. I want you to also focus on how do the dominant males, or how does males signal their status? So physical signals, vocal signals, etc. So provide at least 3 specific examples.
Could you repeat
Okay,
that,
and then
please?
fun.
Oh,
What's that?
you wrote it down. Sorry, you wrote it down. I thought you were just saying it. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so question 1, what resonance patterns do you notice there? There will be 2. How do the dominant males signal their status? I want you to look for physical cues, vocal signals, etc. I want you to provide at least 3 examples, and I want you to be as specific as possible. And then finally, question number 3, I want you to think about how are the females and infants involved in the overall dominance hierarchy here. So even though they may not be the dominant ones, it's definitely, I'll just give you one part of it. The males are definitely dominant here, but even though the males are dominant, doesn't mean that the females and the infants aren't still part of the overarching social structure and dominance hierarchy. So I want you to think about those 3 questions as we watch. It's only a 4-minute clip. So just sit back and watch. I mean, jot down a few notes if you want to, but we will have time to talk about it in our breakout room after. Okay. Let me just make sure I remember to optimize for sound, because we definitely want sound on this video. This one's a good one to hear what's happening. Yep, I can remember to optimize for sound. We've got the volume up. All right, let's watch it and then we'll talk about it after.
Groups of mothers and their young, a harem. Groups of mothers and their young, a harem, gather together to form troops of up to 800 monkeys. Gelada's hands are usually busy plucking grass instead of grooming, so to keep in touch, Geladas have become the chattiest of all monkeys. The gossipy banter can sound to scientists like sentences with words or even names for each other. Most agree it's often used to defuse tension. And in Geladas, there's a lot to be tense about. There are gangs of young males trying to steal away the women from the family harems. Each handful of females is guarded by a single male, the harem master. The spare boys try and tempt the girls away, hoping the resident father figure doesn't notice. The males flash teeth at each other. They may fight, but it's usually just showing off in case the girls are watching. There's a lot of flirting on both sides. And then, if an innocent-looking female is tempted to wander off past her guardian, he has to decide what to do. Girls mostly sneak off secretly for affairs. This is a blatant challenge to his authority. The illicit couple just sit. The suitor seems to be using his hand to hide his grimace. He probably doesn't want trouble. Chimps, baboons and macaques may also try to look innocent when they break the rules. This is a complicated social problem. Using your brain to control societies is called Machiavellian intelligence, after a 16th century courtier who wrote on manipulating political power. Instead of launching into an attack, the politician here tries to grab a baby. Monkey etiquette dictates nobody attacks anyone holding a baby, so they're like living flak jackets. The mothers are worried and quickly scoop up the youngest. Here, the two males face each other. The family man backs towards one of his more loyal wives, calling for support. One of the youngsters suddenly switches from mother to father. This should calm things down. With the youngster attached, the father's protected, and the harem should unite. But it can go wrong. The youngster is slipping off. The family are frantic. The harem master has no protection from attack. The bachelor is finally driven off with a little help from the mothers. But the fathers are meant to guard the precious young. He knows he's in all sorts of trouble. If the infant dies, the mothers may not support him again. Our brain, too, wrestles with our own similar problems. We are as social and as competitive.
All right. All right, so if you haven't already, make sure you write down those 3 questions because we're going to go into our breakout rooms for about 10 minutes and talk about that. Let's stop our recording.